Hi, Bio20s. Today, Chapter 9, we're going to start with the structure of the excretory system, which is basically how your kidneys function to clean your blood. And there are 3 short topics in the excretory system, so I'm pretty confident we can cover these 3 topics this week. For starters, our topic is talking about what excretion is, because it's really a removal of wastes, and our kidneys do remove wastes that are in the blood, but we do have other structures in the body that remove wastes, like the lungs that were removing carbon dioxide, the skin that in perspiration releases some waste products in besides water, and the large intestine, of course, that removes solid wastes that we discussed in Chapter 6. So in order to remove wastes out of the blood, as you can imagine, the blood has to flow into the kidneys at high pressure so those wastes can be removed. But there's a few steps in that process that are going to be the topic of this chapter. So metabolic wastes are going to be a health problem if they accumulate, and so kidneys that don't function can be a life-threatening condition. The 3 main, I call them bad guys. The 3 main bad guys in that your kidneys have to get rid of are ammonia, urea, and uric acid, and those are actually all byproducts of you metabolizing proteins. So all proteins that you are consuming, which of course you need for good nutrition and as building blocks for so many things in your body, including enzymes and all of your cell parts and a lot of your hormones. Though there are byproducts of metabolizing those proteins that you're consuming, your body uses those building blocks, those amino acids, to make things, but then these are these byproducts that have to be eliminated. Ammonia is a very toxic one, and your liver is trying to turn that into urea, so it's a little bit less toxic, but that means that urea ends up being the majority of the toxic waste that is coming out of the cleaning of the blood. And of course, when your blood is cleaned, your kidneys are excreting those wastes in urine. That is what this whole topic is about, is formation of urine as your body, as your kidneys clean the blood. So structures, we may be familiar with your kidneys. If you go and put your fists right now behind you, and if they half are under your ribs, then that is pretty much the location of your kidneys. So they're half covered by the rib cage in your lower back, and those kidneys are connected to ureters, where once the kidneys form urine, those ureters will be where the urine can flow down and collect in your bladder and be excreted out the body through a urethra. And there is a major blood that flows into, that's your renal arteries, that are going to flow into your kidneys, so that is something that branches off of your heart, and the blood will flow into your kidney with high pressure. Once that kidney has received that blood and forms the urine, the blood will leave out the renal veins. So it goes in through renal arteries and out through renal veins. And what we have here is stored urine in the bladder. So that is the general structure of the excretory system. It's pretty simple. Another view of it here, as we see that the ribs are half protecting and covering your kidneys. So if you do have a broken rib, sometimes that can actually pierce the kidney and cause some damage. You see that the bladder is protected by your pelvic bones. And in terms of the urethra, in males, they have a longer urethra because it's in the penis, and females have a shorter urethra, which makes them a little more prone to infections, bladder infections, for example. Okay, so you guys can check out some of the extra slides that I'm flipping through. I'm going to look at the most important parts of our topic here. The sphincters are rings of muscle that will control the elimination of the urine that's in the bladder. And so if it gets filled, for example, like with 400 mils of urine, you might have a relaxing of the internal sphincter, giving you that sensation of needing to relieve your bladder or urinate. And the external sphincter is one that is more in you are more in control of. But if you exceed 600 milliliters and you still have not relieved your bladder, you may lose control of that external sphincter. This is talking about the 20 centimeter urethra of males versus 4 centimeter urethra of females, as I mentioned earlier. A couple of trivia slides you can check out. Now, looking at the kidney, we would like to see what the cross-section of the kidney would look like. In actual fact, it looks like this. And so what we're going to do is highlight what the main structures and parts are. And I'll tell you first that there is a thin capsule around the kidney. And if you're thinking of like the membrane around the lungs, it was called the pleural membrane, and the membrane around the intestines is called the peritoneum, and you had a pericardium around the heart. So you have a renal capsule around the kidney, and that's just a protective layer, and many organs have that. The very outer layer right here is called the renal cortex, and cortex of any organ means the outer part of it. And then the middle structure would be called the medulla, and that would be like about there, medulla of the kidney. And then the inner part is called the renal pelvis. So this structure, this part here that collects urine, would be called the renal pelvis. And so just to review that, cortex is the outer structure, medulla is the middle structure, and the renal pelvis is the inner part of the kidney. Now, what we find in there is something that are these microscopic little nephrons. And so they're showing you that right here. And a nephron, kind of, if I was to draw just one, kind of looks like that. And there are about 1 million nephrons in your kidney, and they extend from partly being in the cortex area and partly being in the medulla area. So right in there is where those little nephrons are, and they are the filtering units of the kidney. So they will have blood passing very close to them, and portions of the blood are going to go into those nephrons. Some of the good stuff was going to be reabsorbed into the blood. The bad stuff is going to be collected as urine, and that urine is going to dump into the renal pelvis and then go down the ureter and out into collecting and holding into the bladder. So that's our little kind of general structure: cortex, medulla, pelvis, three main parts of the kidney. One thing that you can see here is we've got a little picture of the renal artery that's sending the blood into the kidney, and the renal vein that's sending blood out of the kidney. So those main blood vessels are also something you should be aware of. And more facts, you can check out those links and check out those slides on some cool facts about how hardworking your kidney is 24/7. Check those out on the PowerPoint version, as the links are not live on the PDF. So in the notes that follow, we're looking at just the structure again, talking about the cortex being the outer layer, talking about the mini nephrons that are embedded in the cortex and the medulla of the kidney, how the artery goes in, and the vein takes blood out. And this brings us to one very important slide. You will have to know the structure of that microscopic nephron that is the main filtering unit of the kidney. So in the yellow area, you can see that part is the nephron. And in the red area and blue, those are the blood vessels, which are winding around that nephron. So I'll just use blue here. Your nephron is, first of all, containing this this capsule area. Now, it's not just the shape of a C, it's more like a cup, but they're just showing a cross section here. But it cups around the blood that's flowing in from the artery. The blood flowing in makes like a little ball of tiny, tiny capillaries called the glomerulus. And then the vessel continues to wind around and form this capillary network around the nephron, and I will tell you why it forms a network before it actually collects and leaves through the renal vein. Now, when you're looking at the job, I guess I was using this color, the job of the nephron, this capsule is collecting some of the components of the blood. When the blood goes in here, the vessels are so tiny, it's like blocking a garden hose, and you see how if you block the water coming out, it will shoot out with more pressure. So the vessels right here are very, very tiny, and so there's a lot of pressure for blood to shoot into this glomerulus capsule, and it's not the blood cells, the red blood cells or white blood cells that shoot through because they're too big, or proteins, but it's like basically the liquid part, the plasma of the blood containing some of the digested food, as well as the what we call the bad guys, urea, uric acid, and ammonia. So all those components are things like that are found in the plasma, and they get squeezed into the glomerulus and are traveling through our nephron. Now, your nephron has some structures that you should know before we talk about what happens in the blood cleaning process. This first part of the nephron is called the proximal tubule, which proximal means like very nearby. So we've got the Bowman's capsule that collects your basically your filtrate that is squeezed through from the blood. You've got your Bowman's capsule where the filtrate first travels. Then you have this big loop at the bottom called the loop of Henle. And then the more distant one is called the distal tubule. And then we've got the collecting duct, which basically the urine collects in. And we'll head towards the renal pelvis and the bladder for down the ureter and in the bladder for collection. So I encourage you to draw yourself a picture of the nephron. Remember, we start off with the renal capsule, then proximal tubule, then loop of Henle, then distal tubule, then collecting duct. Those structures are important to know, like in order. That is going to be very important when we talk about the events of cleaning your blood in order, because of course there's a flow of filtrate that's moving along those structures. Okay, and as you can see there, the blood winding around has a job, and basically the reason blood winds around your nephron before it leaves the area is that it will be collecting some good stuff that we don't want to have leave in the urine, and it's going to dump off any other bad stuff that it can still get rid of. So there's still a job for the blood to do before it leaves in the renal vein and is on its way. Okay. The loop of Henle, I was going to mention that the loop going down is called the descending loop, and the loop going up is called the ascending loop. So if you see those mentioned, that's what we're talking about there. All right, great idea to draw this lovely picture of the nephron so that you remember those main structures. and parts of the nephron. In real life, we don't just see one at a time in your kidneys. They are all bundled up. This is an actual electron microscope picture. You can see the blood vessel right here. And then all those other tubes in the picture are nephrons, and they're all like packed together because there's so many of them in there for cleaning your blood. So just kind of an outline in 9.1 of what's coming in detail in 9.2 is that basically what I mentioned already is that the artery will go into the Bowman's capsule, and because there's tiny little capillaries in there, the pressure in there are going to cause the blood to get filtered, and the filtrate is not going to be any of the blood cells, but it'll just be basically the plasma that's carrying things like water molecules, bad guys, good guys, food, all that stuff in the filtrate. So the rest of the traveling through the pathway around the nephron, we've got to still get rid of the bad guys and keep the good guys. And the fluid that goes into the nephron of the kidney is called filtrate. That's important to know. In the tubules of the nephron, I just followed it through there, but after the glomerulus, that filtrate will go through the proximal tubule. So we've got Bowman's capsule. Here's the proximal tubule. That filtrate will travel through the loop of Henle. The filtrate will then go through the distal tubule, and then all of the urine will collect in the collecting duct and head down to the renal pelvis of the kidney. Because remember, this nephron is just in the kidney part itself, the cortex and medulla part. So any urine that is collected in the collecting duct is headed into the renal pelvis of the kidney. And that's where then it can go down to the ureter and down to the bladder. Ureter and then bladder. Okay, so that's what this slide is saying. We are finished with our main topic for our main concepts for 9.1, which was structure of our excretory system and structure of the nephron. And I encourage you to draw a picture of both excretory system